Welcome to our weekly Church on the Rock podcast. For more information, visit us at churchak.org, download our Church on the Rock AK app, or like us on our Facebook page. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy our weekly podcast.
Amen. You may be seated. How you doing, Church on the Rock? Oh, you are that group that, how many of you were intending to come to first? You can be honest. It's just public shaming. Don't worry about it. Intending to come to first service, but you got up too late. Okay. How many of you normally come to first service, but today you were like, nope, not today, Satan. Yeah. If I could, if I ever run for office, I'm running on the platform that I will do away with daylight savings time. So just want to put that out there now. By the way, the luggage idea, which is just a super cool thing. Julia, are you in here hiding anywhere? There she is. Julia is over our community development, community partnerships, those sorts of things. She works tirelessly to make the church matter in our community. And she came to me with this idea. She said, we could get luggage for these kids who have to travel out of state. And I was like, that's a great idea. We should just have people donate their good used luggage. And she's like, oh no, that will never do. I'm like, what do you mean that will never do? Like, my girls have these old ratty suitcases, and they just think they're the greatest thing in the world. She's like, we're talking about kids who have never had anything new that's all their own. It has to be new. And I'm like, you're going to waste God's money like that? Like, seriously? She was totally right. The first email that comes back is this young girl who's like, over the moon. I've never had anything new of my own. I can put my own stickers on it. Julia even went and bought her stickers to put on it, with my face, and so it was so good. Just kidding about that part. But I'm just saying, that's a win. And thank you. Thank you for your generosity. That sort of thing is happening in all kinds of small and big ways, all kinds of things I don't know anything about. You've just done them. But I just want to say thank you for being such a generous people. It reflects the heart of God. And Julia, thanks for pushing me to not be a miser. Okay. There, I said it publicly. I wanted to take a moment because as I was driving in this morning and over the course of this past weekend, actually, I ended up navigating 4 different phone calls or situations having to do with depression and suicide. The troopers contacted us, asked if we could send someone out to a situation this weekend, and several other situations. And I was just reminded, and I don't know if you know this, but this time of the year, March and April, are the spike for suicides in the state of Alaska. And I know it sounds counterintuitive because you'd think we're getting more daylight, more sunshine, hope should be rising, but that's the very reason that it happens this time of year, is that people have made it through the winter. They've dealt with depression and suicidal thoughts, and they thought when the sun comes out, things will change, and they've discovered that those same thoughts and feelings are still there, and they plunge into a place of real hopelessness and despair. And I want you to be aware of that. And as I was just coming in today, I was thinking about this passage in Jeremiah 17 for friends of mine over the years who have dealt with suicidal thoughts and depression. What I've discovered is that in that moment, nothing is rational, right? And I was thinking about Jeremiah 17:9. You've probably heard the passage before, but it simply states, the heart is deceitfully wicked above all things, and who can know it? And if that's you, I want you to recognize that in that moment, your heart is deceiving you. It's telling you you're the problem. People would be better off without you, that it's hopeless, that it could never change. And I'm just telling you it can. Reach out to someone, whether you're watching online or whether you're here in this room. And if you know someone who struggles, this is the time of year to reach out to them as well. And I just want to encourage you to do that, to be looking out for one another, to be encouraging one another. We partner with ACF, and they developed a call-in counseling service that is available to anyone. It was specifically designed originally for those in the military who needed a safe place they could reach out. It's counseling. It's professional licensed counseling, and you can actually go to it you can put in hopetoalaska.com, or you can go to ACF's page and find it there. You can also buy a t-shirt, a Hope to Alaska t-shirt from them, and all the proceeds from those t-shirts go to pay for counseling so that it's made available for free to anyone in the state of Alaska. And so I just want you to know there are resources out there. Reach out. Don't be embarrassed. You don't need to be ashamed, and ask for help. All right? I just want to take a moment and say that out loud. So, we're in this series, The Great Escape. I've discovered that there are two kinds of people in the world. There are people who say escape, and there are people who say escape. You can decide which one's correct, but I already know. And so the Great Escape, and follow the GOAT, the greatest of all time. This week we're going to be dealing with the sacrificial system. A couple of weeks ago we dealt with the law. Why did God give the law? And what we discovered is the law was intended to display for us actually our inability to keep it, what God desires and requires, and push us towards the person of Jesus. And so I'm going to start with problems and provisions. Now, Exodus is the story of God calling out a chosen people. They've been in bondage in Egypt for a really long time. They got all kinds of problems, and God is going to deliver them supernaturally, miraculously out of the land of Egypt. But it isn't just that. He's going to engage with them. I actually think it's really significant that God engages with them. What he's really communicating, what he literally says to them is, I want to dwell among you. I want to be with my people. And he tells them this before he gives them the law, before the sacrificial system. What God wants to communicate is that what he desires is to be with us, and to be with his people. I love the way it's described in the New Testament in the coming of Jesus, because it's actually exactly the same description as the Old Testament when God comes to dwell among the nation of Israel. And in John chapter 1, it says, the Word, Jesus, became flesh and made his dwelling among us. The Message paraphrase says it this way, God became human and moved into the neighborhood, which describes it really like, nope, I'm here, I'm present, I'm with you. And God communicates that in overwhelming fashion to the nation of Israel in the book of Exodus. And Exodus, towards the end, God begins to give the law. How do you live with one another? What love looks like? How do you care for your neighbor? All of those sorts of things. How do you pay back when you've wronged someone? And there's that description of the law that's given. And then there's the description of the building of the tabernacle. And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but we could spend weeks and weeks just on the tabernacle, the symbolism, all the parts and pieces that are inside of the tabernacle. But the main idea of the tabernacle is that God wants a dwelling place with his people. And specifically, he wants it to be portable. Like wherever they go, wherever he goes, actually, they go, right? That he's on the move, it's in motion, it isn't this permanent fixture, but it is wrapped in sacrificial skin, the presence of God moving with his people wherever he takes them. But Exodus is going to end with a serious problem, and it's found in Exodus chapter 40, verses 34 through 35. It says, then the cloud covered the tabernacle after all of the ornaments and items are placed in it. The cloud covered the tabernacle, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could no longer enter the tabernacle because the cloud had settled down over it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Now, here's what's interesting to me. I've been thinking about this for several weeks now, so hey, if I get too deep, oh well, listen to it again. But I've been thinking about it, like Moses, prior to this moment in Exodus 40, Moses had been going in and out of this tent. He had been meeting with God routinely. And now, at that point, it was referred to as the tent of meeting. But in this moment, after all of the things that God has instructed to be placed in there, the curtains and the poles and the ark, and all of those items have been placed in it, suddenly Moses can no longer go in. Like, what gives? I mean, God had met Moses in the burning bush. God had met Moses up on the mountain. God had met Moses in the tent of meeting. Like they had met face to face. The scriptures describe it as a man talks with his friend. So God talked with Moses. And now all of the sudden, in this moment at the end of Exodus, Moses can no longer go in to the tabernacle. It's an interesting dilemma, to me at least. And then here's what I'm discovering, is that God had met with Moses in the bush. He had met with Moses on the mountain. He had met with Moses in the tent of meeting. But up until now, God had been coming down for a visit. In fact, in Exodus 24:15, here's how it's described. Then Moses climbed up the mountain, and the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord settled down on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. And then it lifted. Or in Exodus 33:9, and Moses went into the tent, and the pillar of cloud would come down and hover at its entrance while the Lord spoke with Moses. That until now, God isn't coming to visit with them anymore. He is actually establishing his presence or his residence among them. Prior to this, God had been coming to visit or to communicate or to talk with Moses, but in this moment, God is actually coming and establishing his presence. He isn't coming down to meet with them anymore. He's actually inviting them to come in and meet with him where he resides. It's an entirely different picture, and so there are actually some protocols for coming in to his presence. The problem is this: God is holy. We're altogether separate. And anyone who isn't holy cannot be in fellowship with him in his dwelling place. It's too dangerous. Now you may wonder, why do these people get smoked when they come before God in an improper or a wrong way? And I would just say it isn't because God's evil. The Son isn't evil, but I promise you, if you get too close to it, you will get smoked. It is all powerful, right? It's not to be trifled with, and yet it produces life. It's something necessary and good. Now, here's the problem. It's too dangerous for them just to waltz into his presence, but it's a good thing that God is a solution-based thinker. I have this conversation with our staff from time to time. If you're going to come to the table and just tell us the problems with every idea, I'm really good at that. I can see all the problems with my own ideas. If all you're doing is coming and telling us the problems, man, there's lots of other great places in government you can go work. But if you want to bring solutions to the table, bring the problem, and if you bring a problem, bring a solution also. Solution-based thinking. God isn't just presenting a problem, he's actually revealing a problem for a reason, because he wants to describe a provision that he's going to make. And I know for you and I, sometimes all I can see are the problems, right? And here's what you need to know. God is actually making provisions for every problem you can identify. And he's doing it for the nation of Israel here and now, and he's actually doing it specifically in Leviticus. And so if Exodus ends with a problem that Moses can no longer come into the tabernacle, then Leviticus actually begins with a provision. Leviticus 1:1-2. Then the Lord called to Moses, listen to the language, from the tabernacle, right? God is there. He set up his residence. Moses cannot enter in. And so God calls to Moses from the tabernacle, and he said to him, give the following instructions to the people of Israel. When you present an animal as an offering, it starts weird. I mean, if you were just hearing this for the first time, you had just shown up at Church on the Rock today for the very first time, you're a new guest with us, we're so glad that you're here, and I just want to start by letting you know, if you've brought your animal today for your sacrifice, let me give you some instructions regarding it, and you would think, let's go, honey. He's going to give instruction about what kinds of animals you can bring. If you brought a cat, that's a no-go. God doesn't like cats, but if you bring a goat or a bull, there's really specific instructions about the kinds of animals you can bring. So there's a problem. Moses can no longer enter, and yet God begins by describing this provision. And Leviticus begins by describing the sacrifices and the offerings before it gets to the laws and the commands. So what becomes clear in the law, the Torah, is that it doesn't matter if it's in Genesis where we have one command, do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or whether it's the 10 commandments, or whether it's the 613 commandments that are found in all of the law. We will break them whether there's one or whether there's 613. What we've made abundantly clear by this point in the story is that you and I do not have the capacity to consistently obey God, and thus we do damage to our relationship with him. And so what he's going to do is set up his dwelling among them, and then he's going to make provision for how they can come before him. So Leviticus 1 through 7 is this description of the sacrifices and the offerings. Some of them are voluntary, some of them are commanded sacrifices and offerings. You can read them. They are invigorating reading. I would recommend right before going to sleep, whip out Leviticus 1 through 7 and just doze off. But they're describing specific offerings. What you'll discover if you dig into them is that each one of them represents a characteristic of Christ and what he does for us. But what's interesting to me is the first three types of offerings are burnt offerings, grain offerings, and peace offerings. And they're all voluntary. They're not commanded that you must do them. You can do them whenever you'd like. If there's a moment in which you recognize I need to bring an offering to the Lord just to display my dedication or for general sin, I feel like I need right relationship with God, there's something between us, you can do it anytime you want. The grain offering, you could bring it and just express gratitude to the Lord. Or the peace offering, you could just come and give thanksgiving for specific deliverances that the Lord has given you, and you could do it anytime you want. And not only that, but here's what's really interesting. This God, the God of the Scriptures, he actually makes those sacrifices income-based. Depending on your socioeconomic status, if you can't afford a bull or you can't afford a goat, it goes all the way down to grain offerings. Like, he makes provision so that anyone, no matter what their status is, no matter what their income is, could come and make things right with the Lord anytime they wanted to. You know what he's really describing? Is he's describing daily relationship with God versus one-time sacrifice. And the last two are actually the sin offering and the guilt offering. And these actually are for sins committed unknowingly. Is the sin offering? How many of you have committed a sin unknowingly? Okay, and then the rest of you probably haven't, you just told a lie unknowingly, and so now you have done that as well. But those were for like, I didn't know, I just discovered, what? That's a sin? And so you can bring it and you can make things right with the Lord. But the guilt offering, is for when you actually wrong someone else or you knowingly do something wrong and you need to make it right with the Lord, and it involved restitution. For example, I shared this in the first service. Bill and Carlene Pepper were here, and Carlene has chickens. And I don't know if one of their chickens is still alive, but it was my girl's favorite chicken for quite a while. Its name was Lemon. Now it might be lemon pepper chicken, I'm not sure. But imagine if we were over there visiting Bill and Carlene, and we just left with Lemon. We didn't tell them. We took Lemon home. I get to the house. I'm like, what? You stole a chicken? And so I need to now not only make an offering to the Lord, right, for my guilt, but then we also need to go and make restitution to the individual, that you could be made right with God and with your fellow man. Now, God is going to shift gears in Leviticus chapter 8 from the types of offerings and sacrifices. He's actually going to shift gears, and he's now going to describe the priesthood. Aaron and his sons, and this lineage of priests who would actually be the ones who would come before the Lord on behalf of the people of Israel. And so if I were to qualify it, I would say that chapter 8 is sort of the on-the-job training. You know how when you start a new job, they take you through, several days of orientation, and here's the rules. And I had a job, this is just, don't judge me. I worked at Kentucky Fried Chicken, or as my sister, when she was little, called it, Tuckykin Fried Chicken. I worked at Kentucky Fried, I almost said it backwards. I worked at Kentucky Fried Chicken, and you had to do an orientation, right? And so they showed you where the bag of the super sweet spices and how to make the chicken. And like you do this orientation and this training, and then when your training time is done, you turn in your 2 weeks notice. which is exactly what I did. I got there, I was like, this outfit looks stupid and I can't do this, call it vain, I don't care. But that was my only job ever at a fast food restaurant. I couldn't do it. It was finger licking dumb is what it was. So anyways, but this is what these first few days, these 8 days, are for the priests, this training and preparation. Moses is walking them through the process. Moses is the one offering sacrifices, and he's getting everything established and ready. And then chapters 9 and 10 are the first day on the job. How many of you ever had a terrible first day on the job experience? Anyone? Yeah, I see that. Yeah, I'd love to hear your story because it'd make me feel better about several of mine, but I don't want to tell one of mine just yet. I want to tell one for a really good friend of mine, Aaron Weiser. Aaron and I started Church on the Rock Homer together, and I remember one of the very first services. Aaron and I would alternate leading worship and preaching, and so one week he would preach and I would lead worship, the next week I would preach and he would lead worship. And so it was one of his very first times up. We did the kids song. Remember, we used to do the kids song, the kids would all come forward and they'd jump around and break sound equipment and stuff, and then we'd try and pray over them as they dodged our hand. And so we were doing the kids song, and Aaron decided to do a classic, which really fits with our messages from Exodus. He did Pharaoh, Pharaoh. Pharaoh, Pharaoh, oh, baby, let my people go. Yeah. And he gets to the verses, and there are two separate verses. One says Moses raised his rod and he stuck it in the sand and all of God's people crossed on the dry land. The other's Moses raised his head and he cleared his throat and all of Pharaoh's army did the dead man's float, but he mixed them together in the song. And so Aaron gets up and he's like, Moses raised his rod and he stuck it in his throat and all of Pharaoh's army did the dead man's float. I was like, so is that the Message paraphrase? I don't remember that part of the story. And I just could not contain myself. And Aaron, hoping against hope, but knowing me far too well, I came up to pray over the kids, right, as soon as he's done. And I come up and I'm just envisioning Moses with a rod, that'll show them. I come up and I'm just kids, I'm going to pray for you now. And the first thing I want to pray is over this misrepresentation of God's word. I just want you to know Moses did not raise his rod and shove it in his throat. But Pharaoh's army did the dead man's float. Oh man, that was a bad one for Aaron. He embarrasses easily. Mine was actually hauling hay with some friends of mine in Oklahoma. First day out, they had gotten a pop-up loader. In case you know what a pop-up loader is, I got a picture here. A pop-up loader hooks to the side of your trailer or your truck or whatever. And so you drive, and you can see on the picture on your left, good, that it pulls along the side of the trailer, and the bales just kind of run right in there. They're in rows, the square bales. They run in there, and then they go up this hook and conveyor belt inside this tube, and it comes out the side, and it puts the bales right up there. So you don't have to spend the whole day on the ground bucking bales and throwing them up, right? And so we're out there. I'm watching this process. It is awesome. And so finally it's my turn to take a shift driving the truck. Now, when you're driving the truck and you're pulling the trailer, and you got the pop-up loader, you need to be watching in your little mirror on the side, right? Your rearview mirror on the side. And you just need to be watching the bales going, because if they get sideways and they wedge in there and it's they all stack, it's just a nightmare. And so you just want to make sure they're going into that chute straight and then going up the thing. And so I'm watching, and all of a sudden something comes into my view in the mirror that I apparently had missed actually right beside me as I drove by it. Into my mirror comes a telephone pole. And I nailed it right down the middle of that chute, right where it was not supposed to go, and just obliterated the pop-up loader in the middle of day one. As you can imagine, my friends were not remotely happy about this, and it was the last time I got to drive the truck. It was all wrapped around the pole. It was useless. They're you're bucking bales now. I'll stay on the trailer. He's driving. You're bucking the bales. But that was a bad first day for me, for sure. Yeah, I know. Oh, well. You've had those moments, though, when everything seems to be going so well, and then all of a sudden it's not. It's all going sideways. I would say that in a moment, whatever your worst first day of work was, it is nothing compared to what happens to Aaron and his sons on their first day on the job. Everything has been set up. Moses has done his work. Now, let me read to you Leviticus 9, 22 through 24, because it all seems to be going really well, and then, like, the Lord shows up. Leviticus 9, 22 through 24. After that, Aaron raised his hands and stuck them in his throat. Just kidding. Aaron raised his hands toward the people and blessed them. Then after presenting the sin offering, the burnt offering, and the peace offering, he stepped down from the altar. Then Moses and Aaron went into the tabernacle, and when they came back out, they blessed the people again, and the glory of the Lord appeared to the whole community. Fire blazed forth from the Lord's presence and consumed the burnt offering and the fat on the altar. When the people saw this, they shouted with joy and fell face down on the ground. That's a pretty good day. Like, can you imagine if our service ended that way today? I get up after the worship set, I bless all the people, and then the glory of the Lord shows up, fire comes down and consumes the entire worship team. Like, no, it's just my iPad, I don't know, but it consumed the offering that they had made to the Lord, and like God shows up. Now, we would not shout with joy, we'd scream and run out of the building most likely. But in this moment, what they recognize is that God is here. He is with us. He's accepting our presence in his presence. Like, this is a joyful moment for the people of Israel. And it seems to be going really good, but then in Leviticus 10, two of Aaron's sons take the incense and the coals. Leviticus 10, verse 1, Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, put coals of fire in their incense burners and sprinkle incense over them. In this way, they disobeyed the Lord by burning before him the wrong kind of fire, different than he had commanded. So fire blazed forth from the Lord's presence and burned them up, and they died there before the Lord. Ruh-roh. I mean, imagine, aside from like, what? What we're told in the text, what's abundantly clear, is they knew the right thing to do, and they did not do it. What we're not told, and I want to remind you of this, when you're reading stories in the scriptures, we are told nothing about their eternal state. We're simply told that in this moment, God deals with this situation with severe consequence. Remember, he does a similar thing with Moses. When Moses strikes the rock instead of speaking to the rock as God commanded, God tells him, you cannot be the one to lead them into the promised land. You don't even get to go into the promised land after all that he put up with, and yet God's affection for Moses has not changed one bit. God still deeply loves and cares for Moses, but there are consequences in the physical to misrepresenting him. And in this moment, the only thing we're told is that God brings severe temporal consequence on Nadab and Abihu. Like, this is a big deal to God. Verse 3, then Moses said to Aaron, this is what the Lord meant when he said, I will display my holiness through those who come near me. I will display my glory before all the people. And Aaron was silent. What God's really saying here in this moment, and what Moses is saying to Aaron is, listen, this is what God was talking about. It's no small thing to represent him before the people, and there are consequences when we do that wrong, because God is deeply passionate about his own name and his glory for this reason, because he's deeply passionate about being known by his people. And for those who are in leadership, and when you misrepresent him, it is not a small thing. Remember, we're only told how he deals with this in the physical, in this moment. And then Moses goes on to tell Aaron, listen, we have to finish the sacrifices. Like, we have a job, we have a responsibility before the people, and I know you want to grieve right now, and I know you want to mourn right now, and literally he says you want to get drunk right now, but he's like, do not drink any strong drink, do not let your hair down and weep and wail and mourn, do not tear your clothes in this moment. Let's finish what we're responsible to do for the people. And so Aaron calls two more of his sons to come and help with the task. And it gets worse. Like, not only has this happened with Nadab and Abihu, but as they begin to offer the rest of the sacrifices and make the wave offerings and all of those things, they make another critical error in judgment, but this time it is accidental. So Leviticus 10:16, Moses then asked them what had happened to the goat of the sin offering. When he discovered it had been burned up, he became very angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, Aaron's remaining sons. If you're Aaron in this moment, terror is going through your veins. Like, I saw what happened to my other two boys. Now these two have screwed up on the first day on the job, and I'm going to have no kids left by the time this is all said and done. And Aaron comes back to Moses in this moment, and he says, would the Lord have been pleased if, in light of everything that's just happened to me, if I ate the sin offering, which is what he was supposed to do, and not burn it up? And Moses understands, and the Lord is compassionate in this moment. It's a pretty bad first day on the job, you know? Like, it makes my whole pop-up loader incident seem like nothing. The consequences are severe. And obviously the sacrifices and how they're made is clearly a big deal to God. But the question is, why is it a big deal to God? I mean, was it the sacrifices and the offerings that God's actually interested in, or what they represented? Which brings me to the horse and the cart, or the cart and the horse. I mean, however you want to say it, it's up to you. You've probably heard the saying before, right? Don't get the cart before the horse. It would seem like it makes perfect sense, but I found these pictures online in 1928 in Newark, New Jersey, which makes a little bit more sense. They launched a series of races with the cart before the horse. Now you can notice in the picture at the bottom, they have the reins running back to the shoulders and then back up to the bit to turn. This just seems like a disaster waiting to happen, right? Like, clearly it did not catch on, most likely because people died. It was just a really short racing series. And then the one up on top is actually a commercial that Porsche put out, because their cars were powered from the rear. It's rear horsepower. You get, yeah. It might work in the car, but it does not work in real life. Like, there are all kinds of practical reasons why you never put the cart in front of the horse, steering being one of the primary ones, right? And you don't want to get bit. Listen, it's sort of this saying. It originated with Cicero in 44 BC. He said in one of his writings, we put the cart before the horse and we shut the stable door when the steed has already been stolen. It's a way of saying we do things backwards. Like, the order should be different. It's like sayings that we have, the tail wagging the dog. Like, that's backwards, right? It really should be the dog wagging the tail. It's just another way of us saying, don't get the cart before the horse, or don't get things out of order. Keep your priorities straight. It's interesting because I'm going to ask the question again, was God interested in the sacrifices and the offerings, or was he actually interested in what they represent? See, we tend to believe that God somehow wants our sacrifices and our offerings because he needs them. But the book of Acts is abundantly clear. In Acts chapter 9, it says that God doesn't need anything. He is not served by human hands as though he needed anything, for he owns everything. All of it is his. God doesn't need. I mean, have you ever wondered, like, what would God do with our offerings? This may come as a shock to you, spoiler alert, but when you give in your tithes and offerings, we don't stick it all in an envelope and do, airmail to God. Like, we use it for the work of the ministry, but God doesn't have a commissary. He's not going to go spend it somewhere in heaven. He doesn't need our money, and he didn't need their sacrifices. He's actually asking for these things and requiring these things for a very different reason. But you and I tend to think that what God's actually interested in is my sacrifice or my offering that I bring to him. And he actually isn't interested in that. And because those are actually intended to be the byproduct of something else that really drives us. They're intended to be the cart, and the horse is actually something very different that God is interested in. In fact, in Psalm 50, verse 9 and 12 through 14, this is what the psalmist writes, speaking on God's behalf. But I do not need the bulls from your barns or the goats from your pens. If I were hungry, I wouldn't tell you, for all the world is mine and everything in it. Do I eat the meat of bulls? Do I drink the blood of goats? Make thankfulness your sacrifice to God and keep the vows you made to the Most High. Or this one in Jeremiah 7, it's one of my favorites. This is what the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of Israel, says. Take your burnt offerings and your other sacrifices and go eat them yourselves. Wow. A little testy. Go eat them yourselves. When I led your ancestors out of Egypt, it was not burnt offerings and sacrifices that I wanted from them. This is what I told them. Obey me, and I will be your God, and you will be my people. Do everything as I say, and all will be well. In other words, obedience is better than sacrifices. He never wanted their stuff. He wanted their hearts. In the Old Testament and in the New. Isaiah 1, verse 11. What makes you think I want all of your sacrifices, says the Lord? I am sick of your burnt offerings of rams and the fat of fattened cattle. I get no pleasure from the blood of bulls and lambs and goats. Verse 13, stop bringing me your meaningless gifts. The incense of your offerings disgust me. I want no more of your pious meetings. Say what you think, man. He's not saying don't bring the sacrifices or offerings. He's addressing the reason that they bring them. We tend to think that giving at the office is what God's interested in. Hey, I brought my tithes. I showed up at church. I made it 3 times this month. God's got to be super stoked about that, right? Hey, I don't know if you grew up in church world like I did, but 3 times a week would be something God is pleased with. like every time the doors are open. I think we fundamentally believe that if I did my part, if I gave my money, if I served someone in the community, that God is now somehow pleased with that. But that's the cart before the horse. Those things are actually byproducts of something else that God is actually interested in. He goes on in Isaiah 1, verse 16, wash yourselves and be clean. Remove your sins from before me. Give up your evil ways. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Help the oppressed. Defend the cause of the orphans. Fight for the rights of the widow. Come now, let's settle this, says the Lord. Though your sins are like scarlet, I will make them white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, I will make them white as wool. If you will only obey me. You know what the Lord wanted in the Old Testament? Faith. He wanted his people to believe him, that his intentions were good, that his desire for them was for their benefit, that he wasn't a God who needed anything from them. He had delivered them by no effort of their own. They could not lift a finger. When my family does the Sabbath together, we read the passage in Deuteronomy, and passage in Deuteronomy, it ends with saying, remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. And then at the end it says, and remember, you were slaves in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God delivered you out of there with his mighty hand, and we hold our hand up, and with his outstretched arm, and we stretch our arms out. Like you couldn't lift a finger to deliver yourself. I did it for you. I don't need your sacrifices. I long for your heart. It was the same in the Old Testament as it is in the New Testament, as it is in our day. All of the other things are actually the outflow. They're the cart that follows the horse named faith. That I believe God and I trust him. And so I come before him with my offering in light of my faith and trust and affection for him. God delights in our faith for 2 primary reasons. The first one is this: because our faith makes our relationship with him possible. that God delights in the sacrifices. He delights in offerings, but he delights in them when they're given from a place of faith. And faith paves the way for relationship with God. And what God craves for you is relationship with himself. And relationship doesn't exist when I believe I paid for it. That's called prostitution. That somehow God owes me something now because I brought my offering, because I made my sacrifice, and God now owes me something. That was the old system, all the false gods and the foreign gods, but this God is extending himself to you, and he's asking you by faith to receive that relationship and come into his presence, and he is paving a way for it in the Old Testament through the sacrificial system, and it will find its fulfillment all the way in the New Testament in that day when Jesus makes one full and final payment for all sin for all time. Would you stand with us? The second reason is this: because what genuine faith produces is obedience from us and for others. That's why when Jesus is speaking in Matthew and he says, when you bring your gift to the altar, when you bring your offering to the altar, and as you get there, you remember that there's something between you and your brother or you and your sister. He says, I don't want your gift. Leave your gift right there, and first go be reconciled. Go do the right thing. Go make the relationship right, and then come and offer your gift, because your gift is intended to be a byproduct of your faith and trust in his way that we're called to live. It's a dangerous thing to get the cart before the horse. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 1 through 7. The old system under the law of Moses was only a shadow. It was a dim preview of the good things to come, not the good things themselves. The sacrifices under that system were repeated again and again, year after year, but they were never able to provide perfect cleansing for those who come to worship. But instead, those sacrifices actually reminded them of their sins year after year, for it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. That is why when Christ came into the world, he said to God, and this is a quote from Psalm 40, "You did not want animal sacrifices or sin offering, but you gave me a body to offer. You were not pleased with burnt offerings or other offerings for sin. Then I said, look, I have come to do your will, O God, as it is written about me in the scriptures." Jesus is the fulfillment of the law. Jesus is the fulfillment of the sacrificial system. And Jesus is the way for you and I to enter in to the presence of God.
Thank you for listening. For more of our podcasts and to discover how you can connect, visit us at churchak.org or download our Church on the Rock AK app from either iTunes or Google Play.